the coverage of the Queen has gone above and beyond. Yes, you can tear me up for saying, oh, what's wrong with you? The woman was a good... Look, let me tell you something, folks, all right? Well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and listen to what Ali Velshi has to say. I mean, he schooled many on colonialism, and then I have a few words that I want to talk about. Because I tell you something, I am very upset at this grand daily coverage, using up a lot of time that should be placed on educating us on what's going on in the economy and much more. But we're dedicating it to a funeral for, again, I don't want to be insensitive, but yes, the Queen died. Yes, the Queen outwardly presented a positive attitude, but let's understand what monarchy represent and what it represents to a lot of us, to my ancestors, what it represents to the Jamaicans, the Trinidadians, all the folks from the West Indies, were my genesis, which is my genesis. So let's go ahead and listen to Ali Velshi, and then we'll move on.
How about we talk a little more about colonialism? The first Elizabethan era ended when Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603. Her 45-year reign was, quote, a golden age, though I guess that kind of depends on your perspective, which marked England's emergence as an ambitious and ruthless global power. Elizabeth I heavily encouraged privateering, granting charters or trading and exploration rights to private companies, which paved the way for an intercontinental empire. It was she who gave Walter Raleigh permission to set up a small colony on Roanoke Island, Britain's first foray into the colonization of America. Now, centuries later, the second Elizabethan era has just ended with the death of Queen Elizabeth II. The two reigns invite easy comparison, and they are tethered by their unique positions in the timeline of British colonialism, the beginning and the beginning of the end. In the 1920s, the British Empire was at its zenith, ruling and controlling the natural resources and economic output of around a quarter of the world's entire population, about 413 million people at the time. All of these countries in red were controlled by the British Empire. You can see Canada, Australia, India, Ireland, much of Africa, just to name a few of the countries. To quote an often used phrase throughout the 18th and 20th centuries, the sun never sets on the British Empire. It literally meant that it was daylight somewhere around the globe in a place that Britain controlled. But nightfall for the empire was on the horizon by the time Elizabeth became queen, and it was ushered in by the colonized, not by the colonizer. In 1947, a few months after Queen Elizabeth II's 21st birthday, but 5 years before she became the monarch, Britain would lose one of its most crucial imperial possessions, India, and the newly partitioned Pakistan. For more than a century, Britain had exploited local rulers, workers, and resources in India, flooding the British economy with cotton and cash. India not only paved the way for Britain's massive global rise, but funded the continued progress of the Industrial Revolution. Remnants of colonialism in India continue in the conflict between India and Pakistan and India's continued colonization of Kashmir. And I don't need to make a metaphor here. The 105 Kohinoor diamond, which sits in one of the 3 royal consort crowns, is a spoil of war from India. As countless sought and achieved independence from England, many became members of the British Commonwealth, which was formed in 1949. Upon her death, Queen Elizabeth II remained the head of state of 15 Commonwealth nations who chose her as their head of state. 36 of those countries are now republics without a royal head of state. 5 have their own monarchs. While the Commonwealth is a clear vestige of colonialism, initially conceived as a consortium of white settler colonies like South Africa at the time, the Commonwealth was a vehicle to preserve Britain's global influence at a time when decolonization was getting more popular around the world. But really, it positioned Britain at the head of a massive school, teaching the former colonists how to behave and how to, in theory, self-govern. Through the lens of history, it's now often seen as patronizing, sometimes racist, including during the 12 years that apartheid South Africa was a member, and it's generally a superfluous thing and probably a waste of money. By the mid-1970s, the British Empire was reduced to little pockets around the world. When Hong Kong was transferred to China in 1997, the then Prince of Wales called it, quote, the end of empire. That prince is now King Charles III. Colonization, British or otherwise, was economic exploitation, violence, and racism. Decolonization, virtually never initiated by the British, was often a bloody and deadly fight for independence. Example after example. The U.S. Revolutionary War, the concentration during the Boer Wars in South Africa, the massacre of hundreds of Sikh worshippers in Amritsar, India, in under 10 minutes, by the way, in 1919, the death of between 20,000 and 100,000 people in the Mau Mau uprising in my birthplace of Kenya in the 1950s, the Opium Wars with China, and lesser-known atrocities like civilian torture in Cyprus, the continued mess that is Israel and Palestine today. All of it is the legacy of British colonialism. Queen Elizabeth was widely respected and admired. But if you're having mixed feelings about the mourning of the Queen and the institution she represented for so many decades, that's valid, and you're not alone.
And that is important to understand. People say, "What? Let bygones be bygones." No, there are still people are still living through the remnants of what the colonial world was. What is happening in Jamaica? What's happening throughout the world right now that was colonized? Colonized sounds too nice, right? When you say the British colonized all these other countries, that sounds pretty. Okay, so they went out there and they put their rule. It was deeper than that. They went to exploit. Colonize is just a nice way of saying we exploit the people, we enslave the people, we took the natural resources of all those lands that we controlled and brought them to England, to the British. That's what it stands for. And she was the head of that, or she is, or was the head of that entire organization, and she is a symbolic head now who has just passed away, and now another king has risen to take on this same symbolic reign of an evil institution. And we have spent hours upon hours glorifying that which affected billions of people around the world. So I am not going to be kind with those who just want to say, let bygones be bygones, because in my humble opinion, bygones be bygones mean the demoralization of many. It also means some believing that others are better than they are. That is colonization. And the most shameful part about this is having the leaders of new countries that are part of the Commonwealth or were part of the Commonwealth or were colonized, that they are somehow attending a funeral of the person who is on top of that agency that colonized them. I mean, trust me, I understand why. It has a lot to do with money. Yeah, we be nice to England or to the UK or to the British, and when we need the help of the British to get a few bucks here and there, we get it. Well, stop it. You don't need the British. The richest parts of this world are those places where the British colonized. They can stand on their own. I mean, again, they can stand on their own. The British Isles had very little to offer. That's why they ran all over the place and took over other fertile lands, other lands with resources. People, please, especially those who were formerly enslaved, either in chains, in mines, or otherwise by the monarchy or the monarchies around the world, we should have zero reverence for those people. Zero. Because again, that is a society that says we don't believe in democracy. We believe that there are a certain group of us that are inherently, rightfully owners of the world. We cannot have that. And believe it or not, it sounds nice and sweet when you're watching it on MSNBC and CNN and the Queen going through the streets, etc. It looks good. Look, I don't mean to be someone that's demeaning the dead or anything like that. Like I said, I feel for her family. I feel for them. But the glory and the pomp and circumstance that's occurring right now is doing nothing but removing the stench that is monarchies and colonialism. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.